So Salatiel Perez will be our next witness providing testimony.
Okay, good morning.
Buenos días. Pues yo vengo solo a dar como mi testimonio vivido.
So I just want to speak a little bit about my own lived experience.
He trabajado en un rancho que está dentro del programa y uno que que no está en el programa.
Because I've worked on a farm that is enrolled in the Milk with Dignity program, and I've worked on a farm outside of the Milk with Dignity program.
Tengo 13 años trabajando en los ranchos de ordeña y trabajé 10 no estaba en el programa y las condiciones son demasiado críticas.
I've worked in total 13 years on Vermont dairy farms. 10 of those have been on a farm outside the Milk with Dignity program. And I can say, based on that experience, that there's a crisis in labor conditions.
Y tengo 3 en el que está en el programa.
And now I've been 3 years on a farm enrolled in the program.
En el rancho donde no estaba en el programa trabajaba 9 horas. No, me pagaban 9 horas diarias, pero tenía que trabajar 13.
So on the farm outside the program, I was paid for 9 hours a day of work, while my actual work hours were 13 hours a day.
Nunca en los 10 años, nunca tuve una semana o unos días de vacaciones.
In the decade working there, I never had a vacation. I never got to take time off.
Cuando nos enteramos en ese rancho de que estaba el programa de justicia inmigrante y leche con dignidad, fui una de las personas que empezó como a hablar con el patrón y decirle que eso era algo bueno para los trabajadores y al final terminé despedido.
And so when I learned about migrant justice and the Milk with Dignity program, I started to talk to my employer and say, hey, this is something really good. This would bring a change here. But I was fired from the farm.
En una ocasión se acercaba la fecha de Navidad, de Año Nuevo. A nosotros en la casa se nos rompió la lavadora. Y en el rancho hay lavadoras para lavar los trapos, las toallas de donde limpia uno las batas. Y ellos nos obligaban a lavar nuestra ropa allá. Yeah.
I remember one year, this was right around Christmas time, New Year's, and the washing machine in our house broke. But instead of fixing it, the employer told us that we should wash our clothes in the washing machine on the farm, which is used for washing the rags and towels that are used during milking.
Tardamos hablando con el patrón como 2 meses, diciéndole que la lavadora estaba rota y solo nos decía que la iban a reparar. Y era una lavadora en realidad que si la movía se desarmaba. O sea, no era como para reparar.
So we spent 2 months asking the boss to get a new washing machine. And he just kept putting it off, saying, oh, I'll get it fixed. I'll get it fixed. And believe me, if you had seen this thing, you would know that it couldn't be fixed. Just by touching it or moving it, it would fall apart.
Sí, pues ya que pasó todo eso, pues ellos en esa fecha pues están con su familia y todo. Entonces tuvimos una reunión, todos los trabajadores con un intérprete. Y pues yo fui el que dijo que pues en esa fecha todos están con su familia y que no era posible que nosotros no tuviéramos en ese día de fiesta de Navidad por lo menos nuestra ropa limpia.
And so, like I said, this was around the holidays, and we asked for a meeting with the employer, and we had an interpreter come in. And I spoke with my boss, and I said, look, this is the holidays. You're spending time with your family. We want to spend time with our family. How is it possible that during this season we can't even have clean clothes to wear?
Sí, después de eso él decidió, compró una lavadora, pero me despidió.
And so after that meeting, he finally came around and bought a new washing machine for the house, but at the same time, he fired me.
Como yo dije que sí, yo quería una explicación por qué él me estaba despidiendo.
And
Entonces él lo único que me dijo fue que ya no había más. No, él no me dio la cara, sino fue el encargado y me dijo, si tú no te vas, voy a llamar a migración.
so I wanted an explanation for why I was being fired from the farm, and I asked him why, and he wouldn't even show me his face. He sent the supervisor to tell me that if I didn't get off the farm, he would call immigration on me.
Y ahora terminé yéndome de ahí. Entonces ahora estoy en un rancho que está en el programa y las cosas son 5 o 6 veces mejor que hay muchos beneficios. Ahora cada año tengo mi semana de vacaciones, días de enfermedades pagados. Si se rompe una lavadora en la tarde, en la mañana ya está nueva. Las casas están en muy buen estado.
So from there, I was able to get work on a farm enrolled in the Milk with Dignity program. And I can tell you the conditions are just vastly better, 5, 6 times better than what I was having before. We have paid vacation. We have paid sick leave. If the washing machine breaks one evening, by the next morning, it's fixed or there's a new one there. The housing conditions are in great condition. The housing is great.
Si tenemos una cita en el médico, tenemos la oportunidad de poder salir del rancho, del trabajo, ir a tu cita. Y son cosas muy, muy diferentes a las que viví 10 años.
If you have a doctor's appointment to go to, you just let the employer know, and there's flexibility where you can take the time off that you need to go to your medical appointment. That's so different from what I was living under the 10 years before.
Y pues mi familia ahora es diferente, es más feliz. Entonces, hay muchos compas que están todavía pasando lo que yo viví 10 años.
Things are different for my family now. We're much happier than before. But unfortunately, there's still many farm workers in the state who are living under the conditions that I suffered for 10 years.
Y pues ojalá y se pueda hacer algo para que todos tengan una vida digna y una vivienda digna y todo sea mejor para toda la comunidad.
And so I hope that something can be done so that people can live a dignified life in dignified housing. I hope you can do something for our community.
Y pues esa es mi experiencia.
And so that's my experience.
Right, let's open it up for questions then. Representative Tessa-Tangerman?
Thank you. And
Gracias.
I'm wondering if, so conditions are better, but are you still working 12 hours a day, just with better pay?
Las condiciones son mejores en el rancho. ¿Sigues trabajando las largas jornadas de 12 horas y por mejor pago o hay un cambio en horario también?
Las horas son menos y el pago es mejor.
There are fewer work hours and better pay. Really, to emphasize that point.
That was a happy sound.
Yeah.
Senator Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do appreciate the differences between those that are participating in the program. But as far as I know, whenever I've gone into a store, there is no milk that's labeled as Milk with Dignity milk. Doesn't that mean that everything's commingled in the end and shipped to wherever it gets to? And doesn't that mean the consumer in the end pays the difference?
Si quiere, yo puedo responder.
Sí, sí, muy bien entendido.
Thank you for the question, Senator Collmore. I'll respond myself rather than in my role as an interpreter. And we'll come back to the way that the program functions a little bit more. When a company participates in the program, there are two different ways that it could be implemented. If the company has a direct sourcing relationship with farms, they would be paying the premium directly to farms where they source their milk. And there's been some reporting on this, but we hope in the next month or two, we'll be announcing a new participating buyer that will be directly sourcing from farms in Vermont. But it's not finalized yet, so I won't share more details on that. But as you know, and as many of the committee is aware, most of the milk in Vermont is commingled through the dairy cooperatives. So when that is the case, with Ben & Jerry's, for example, they purchase their milk or they source their milk through the Dairy Farmers of America co-op. Prior to their entrance in Milk with Dignity, they had already created a mass balance program called Caring Dairy. And what that means is they identify a certain number of farms within the co-op where they source their milk that produce an equivalent volume to the milk that they buy from the co-op. So while the milk is commingled, they're able to segment out a portion of the co-op to say that we are responsible for these farms and we're going to work with these farms as the segmented farms in our supply chain that are producing an equivalent volume to the volume that we purchase. And so Milk with Dignity was able to be sort of added on to that supply chain and to what Ben & Jerry's had already created called Caring Dairy. And so the 53 or 54 farms that are currently enrolled in the program produce an equivalent volume for Ben & Jerry's sourcing. It's a mass balance. And so that's a way that companies within a commingled supply chain can really affect a positive influence in improving conditions in the dairy industry. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, I think I understand. So can you tell me what the average premium is that goes to the farmer? And also, if Ben & Jerry's does do this, do you know whether they, in essence, just pass that along to the consumer by raising their own prices?
Thank you for the question. The premium paid by participating companies is subject to the confidentiality clause within the contract. So unfortunately, we're not able to share the exact amount that Ben & Jerry's or any future participating buyer pays. It's negotiated as a price per hundredweight. So similar to what a farm would get as a bonus from the co-op for a bacteria count, for example. Farms enrolled in the program get an additional price per hundredweight. There are also floors and ceilings to the premium to try to achieve some equity. So smaller farms in the program may be getting a higher price per hundredweight. Larger farms in the program may be getting a little bit lower price if they're at the ceiling. So that evens things out somewhat. But essentially, it's a price per hundredweight.
And what about,
and I'm sorry, the second part of your question, excuse me for interrupting. There's no indication for Ben & Jerry's that they have raised prices for the consumers in order to cover the costs to the company for their participation in the program. And as the previous witness says, these are companies that are making hundreds of millions or sometimes billions of dollars in annual profits. And so in the case of Ben & Jerry's, they've been able to absorb the cost of their participation in the program without passing it on to consumers.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Can you tell us how big your farm is in terms of the number of employees?
Donde yo estoy somos como 30 mexicanos.
Where I am, there's about 30 Mexican workers.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, just sort of generally speaking, and maybe this is more a question for Will, whether the farms that are participating are larger farms.
En general, ¿tú sabes de los ranchos del programa tienden a ser más grandes o más pequeños? No sabes.
Es depende, ¿no? Depende. El rancho que son pequeños tienen menos gente. Donde yo estoy, habemos 30, pero son como 3,000 vacas.
It really depends. There are larger farms and smaller farms. The smaller the farm, the fewer employees they have. On our farm, we have about 3,000 cows. And I'll just add to that, of the farms enrolled in the program, there is quite a range. There are about a dozen farms that are considered inactive, which means that they don't currently employ any non-family employees. So those farms get a nominal premium from the participating buyer, with the condition that if they were to grow at some point and hire any non-family employees, they would be subject to the program's code of conduct. They would have certain standards for those employees. So there are a number of very small farms like that. There are a number of farms with 1 or 2 employees, and then it goes up to the size of the farm that Salatiel works at.
Other questions? Senator Brock.
Just to clarify, what were the number of farms that do not have any migrant workers who are participants in the program?
Está preguntando cuántos ranchos en el programa no tienen trabajadores inmigrantes. I can get you that figure. One piece of clarification actually is that the program, while it is aware of what farms have migrant workers and what farms don't, there's no distinction for the way that a worker is treated in the program based on whether they are born and raised in Vermont or whether they're an immigrant worker. Any worker, regardless of their immigration or citizenship status, that is a non-family, non-supervisory worker is covered by the program's code of conduct. And so there are quite a number of English-speaking Vermont-born workers who are benefiting and have seen higher wages and new benefits due to the Milk with Dignity program. And just, personally speaking, that's been quite, I think, a wonderful part of Milk with Dignity, that this program that was created by immigrant workers is benefiting both that community and also non-immigrant dairy workers as well. But to your question, there are currently 12 farms that are enrolled in the program that don't have any, the term is qualifying workers, as a non-family, non-supervisory employees. There are 42 active farms for a total of 54 participating farms and 256 qualifying workers. Thanks, Jennifer.
If a farm approached you, or perhaps if the farmer who had employed you previously had been receptive to your suggestion that they join the program, Milk with Dignity program, would the organization have been able to accommodate them, given that you need a certain demand from the companies that you're working with and trying to recruit also?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. I'll respond to that as well. The sort of short answer is maybe yes, maybe no. You're hitting the nail on the head that for a farm to participate, they need to be in the supply chain of a participating buyer. Currently, Ben & Jerry's is the first participating buyer in the program, and workers are working to expand the program beyond Ben & Jerry's supply chain. But there's some fluctuation within the supply chain. As the committee is well aware, the dairy industry continues to go through a process of consolidation that accelerated during the COVID pandemic. So some farms that have been in the program have closed and sold their cows. And so there's always the opportunity for new farms to enter. And actually within the past year, 4 or 5 new farms have joined the program and are now making the changes needed to improve conditions to meet the code of conduct. So the answer is perhaps, yeah, sometimes there's openings for farms to join. Depende si otro rancho sale o un rancho puede entrar.
All right, good, thank you very much, Saltiel, thank you for your. And we are now going to have Yesenia. Morning.
Morning. No, mi nombre es Yesenia y trabajo en una granja en Ines.
My name is Yesenia and I work at a farm in Enosburg.
Sí. Como escucharon los testimonios de mis compañeros, creo que sí se necesitan soluciones reales sobre los problemas que aún enfrentamos en los ranchos.
As you've heard in the previous testimony from my fellow members, there are serious problems on dairy farms that need serious solutions.
Sí. Es por eso que nos organizamos y creamos el programa de leche con dignidad.
And that's why we organized to create the Milk with Dignity program.
Este programa está implementado por resolver los problemas más de los ranchos que aceptan estar en el programa.
And this is a program that's been able to resolve many problems on the farms that are enrolled in the program.
Sí. Y es muy buena opción que los ranchos que no están bajo el programa, sería buena opción de que ellos entraran para que muchos trabajadores dejaran pertenecer a los problemas que los muchachos, como uno de ellos, hay muchos que están en eso.
And so we think that this is an important model that more farms should be able to join so that the types of problems that you've been hearing about from the previous witnesses, which aren't just experienced by them, but really by many, many workers in the state, that those problems can be resolved.
Sí, y no es algo malo porque creo que se beneficia tanto el patrón como también los trabajadores, mejorarían el problema que realmente está en uno de los problemas que realmente están pasando.
And we don't see this as a bad thing. This is something that benefits both workers and it benefits the bosses too.
Sí, bajo el programa de Leche con Dignidad también hay personas que se dedican a educar a las personas, a saber cuál es su derecho, cuáles son su prioridad y los privilegios que hay estando debajo del programa de Leche con Dignidad.
When a farm joins the program, workers and managers receive regular education sessions on what are the rights and benefits due to workers under the program.
Sí, porque sabemos que a veces hay personas latinos, inmigrantes, que estamos trabajando en ranchos que no están bajo el programa. A veces tenemos como problemas, no sabemos qué hacer. Y si no nos orientamos, si alguien no viene y nos dice, ahí vamos a seguir estancados.
Because there are many Latino immigrants who are working on farms, who are unfamiliar with their rights and who have come to expect certain conditions. And so if somebody doesn't come and say, hey, these are the new rights that you have, we'll never know and there won't be any changes.
Y también ofrece como si quieres, hay una línea telefónica donde tú puedes hablar. Y si necesitas decirle al patrón como interpretación o si quieres como sobre decirle de citas que tiene, eso también es accesible para nosotros.
When your farm is in Milk with Dignity, you have access to a 24-hour support line that you can call if you have any questions or complaints, or if you need help talking with your employer, even if it's just to let them know that you have a doctor's appointment and need to change your schedule. It's accessible to us.
Esos son los beneficios que hay de estar, de estar dentro del programa de leche con dignidad. Mi testimonio, cuando yo empecé, yo tengo 10 años aquí y 8 años he estado trabajando en granja.
So these are some of the benefits that you have in the program. In my personal experience, I've been in Vermont for 10 years. 8 of those years, I've worked on dairy farms.
Y estoy en el lugar, en la granja donde estoy, ese rancho antes no estaba bajo el programa con leche con dignidad. Y había veo la diferencia que hay ahorita, que está cuando no estaba y ahora que está.
And the farm I'm working at right now, when I first started working on that farm, it wasn't enrolled in Milk with Dignity. While I've been there, it has since joined the program. And so I can see the changes that have happened on that farm.
Sí, y cuando yo inicié a trabajar en esa granja, a mí me pagaban a 9.45. Tenía que trabajar 7 días a la semana y las 12 horas corridas.
When I first started, I was making $9.45 an hour. I was working 7 days a week, 12-hour straight shifts a day.
Y no descansábamos, nada más que nosotros como inmigrantes a veces necesitamos, por necesidad, estamos ahí, no nos movemos a otro lugar, sino que tratamos de echarle ganas, como de tener la esperanza de algo, de algún cambio.
We didn't rest. And sometimes when you're an immigrant and you're working out of a need, you don't think that you can do anything else. You're just there working, focused only on that, and you don't think that there can be a change in your life.
Sí, la vivienda donde estábamos cuando inicié no estaba en condición de descansar. La traila estaba húmeda, la parte del techo. Y la cama que nos dieron para descansar, igual era una cama, tal vez como un poquito, una individual. Y la parte de abajo, pues también, ¿no? Era de una madera que me acuerdo que tal vez el grueso de 2 dedos. La parte de abajo y arriba, pues el colchón. Claro que y ahí tenía que dormir con mi pareja. Sí. Estaba en pésimas condiciones. Vienes trabajando todo el día para poder descansar, ¿no? Ni te puedes mover, se te entume el brazo. Era un trabajo. Pues.
And the house that we were living in was not in dignified and humane conditions that allowed you to rest in the hours when you weren't working. There wasn't a good seal on the roof, and so the house was very humid. Moisture entered, and the bed I was sleeping on, it was kind of about this size, a very small bed that was just on, I remember, the part below was a piece of plywood that was maybe as thick as my 2 fingers, and then the mattress on top. And my partner and I had to share that bed. And so we were crunched together, and you couldn't move around, and you'd wake up and your arm would be still asleep because you didn't have enough room to sleep.
Sí, y ahora con el rancho entró al programa de leche con dignidad, las camas ya no son así, porque es diferente. El sueldo también se mejoró muchísimo. Hay personas que han entrado nuevas al trabajo y su sueldo es el mínimo. Y algo que quieres decir, como que ya no lo dice uno con miedo porque el patrón como que se volvió más accesible dentro de eso. Y como dijo él hace rato, si te rompe a nosotros se nos había fallado una estufa, que esa estufa, el mismo patrón nos lo había dicho que esa esa estufa tenía 25 años ahí. Y yo creo que de tanto usarla, se le rompió algo. Entonces le dijimos que ya no se... Rápido la sacó y nos puso una nueva. Pero esos son los cambios que hay, que ya no hay como ese temor. El sueldo mínimo, pues ya se respeta, porque ni aún así se respetaba. Antes, nada más lo que te subían era 60 centavos, año con año. Claro que ahorita al mínimo, ¿cuándo le íbamos a llegar al mínimo? El mínimo iba para arriba y pues nosotros nunca le íbamos a llegar. Y esos son uno de los que tal, ay, ya me pasé.
So then, once the farm entered the Milk Digny program, it was a complete change. Those beds were out of there, and the new beds came in. The housing improved in so many ways. And you know, mostly we were able to feel like we had a voice. We could speak up without fear. And so if something broke down or wasn't working, we could raise our voices and talk about it. I remember our stove broke, and the boss, he himself said, "Oh yeah, that stove had been there 25 years. I'm not surprised it broke down." But we could have that conversation. So the stove broke, something failed on it, and really quick, new stove was brought in, solved the problem. When we talk about wages, as I said, I had started at $9.45 an hour. Every year we would get a raise, but the minimum wage kept going up as well. So it was like we were like chasing behind the minimum, and we never would have been paid minimum wage were it not for the program. But once the farm entered, now when a worker comes in, they're getting the Vermont minimum wage. That's the baseline salary.
Sí, y eso es lo que me llena de satisfacción, porque en el lugar donde estamos nosotros, sabemos como, tal vez como 10 mujeres, y hasta ahorita no hemos recibido discriminación, sino al contrario. Somos como un poco más respetadas, de que no tiene que haber cosas ni aún con los trabajadores, ni con los patrones. Habemos, creo que como 4 mujeres que tenemos hijos. Y eso es para mí, no me he movido ese trabajo porque siento que es flexible con las cosas de que yo tengo que estar pendiente de mis hijos. A veces tengo reuniones en la escuela, tengo citas. Y es algo flexible que si yo le digo al patrón que tengo que salir y él me dice que sí, se consigue rápido otro trabajador porque hay extra para poder cumplir ese turno. En la parte de la ordeña, yo estoy en la parte de alimentando a los bebés. En la parte de la ordeña hay mujeres que también son madres y llevan a sus hijos a cuidarlos ahí, les tienen un cuarto donde pueden estar con sus hijos, que sus hijos estén ahí en algo calientito, mientras ellas están trabajando. Si ella tiene que salir a llevar a la escuela, eso es flexibilidad que hay, que tenemos estando bajo el programa y que estamos respetadas, no somos discriminadas por tener nuestros hijos. Y sí.
And then one part that I want to share that really fills me with so much satisfaction is that there are 10 women working on our farm. And none of us are suffering from gender-based discrimination. None of us are experiencing sexual harassment of any kind, whether it's from coworkers or from supervisors. We feel comfortable working there, which is such a change. 4 of us are mothers. We have children, and being in the program allows us to have the flexibility that we need to both work on a farm and raise our kids. I work with doing calf care. Other women work as milkers, and if they need to bring their kids with them, there's a room there's an office that's warm where the kids can play, and so they don't have to worry about their kids. And then when they get to school age, you have the flexibility to be able to shift your schedule so that you can bring your kids to school and pick them up when you need to.
Entonces, así como hay ranchos que están bajo el programa y hay ranchos que no. Y es por eso que no nos unimos a hacer, a tratar de que los demás ranchos entren bajo el programa Con Leche con Dignidad, porque creo que todos tenemos derecho a una vivienda digna, a un sueldo justo, sobre todo, porque el trabajo que nosotros desempeñamos no cualquiera lo desempeña, no cualquiera se levanta a las 4 de la mañana, a las 3 de la mañana para levantarse y tratar de recargarse y empezar a ordeñar las vacas, de tratar de alimentar a los bebés, de salir a las casitas en el invierno. Es algo que siento que debe ser valorado, la mano de obra.
And so as you've heard, there are farms that are in the Milk with Dignity program, and there are farms that are out of the Milk with Dignity program. But I think that every dairy worker deserves to live in dignified housing and deserves to have a livable wage. Because I want to ask you, who is going to do this work of waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning, milking cows, bringing calves, transporting calves, going out in the dead of winter in the cold? Who's going to do that job? And those of us who are doing it deserve to be treated with dignity.
Y sí, creo que necesitamos ese apoyo, porque realmente ahí está el problema. Y si no lo solucionamos, pues no sé qué vamos a hacer. No nos queremos quedar en el olvido, necesitamos apoyo. Creo que realmente si nos ponemos a que todos los trabajadores vengan y den sus quejas, creo que casi es similar van a ser similar a todos los que no están bajo el programa.
So
Sí, porque hay unos que no tienen descanso, otros que no van a checarse al doctor, pues lo mismo casi que lo que le pasó al primo de mi compañero, que a veces uno se enfoca más en el trabajo o porque no tiene tiempo o porque no tiene esa accesibilidad de ir al doctor un día para él. A veces nos pasan cosas, un chequeo médico.
And so the problems that we're experiencing are real. And again, we need real solutions. What you've heard today is just a sliver, just a snippet. And you could bring in 1,000 workers and you'd hear 1,000 of these stories. Every dairy worker who's not in the program today, in the Milk with Dignity program today, can tell you something similar. And I was struck by the story told by my fellow member about his cousin who died, and that really affected me because I've been there too. You ignore your own health, you ignore your own well-being because the only thing you can do is focus on work.
Es todo. Espero que tomen conciencia sobre eso y si tienen preguntas, pues igual.
And that's all. I hope that what my words have helped to bring about a greater consciousness of what we're facing. And if you have any questions, have at it.
All right, thank you. Yes, Representative Tissantanger.
Thank you, Chair. So some of the changes in the Milk with Dignity program are directly brought about by the infusion of the extra amount that's paid for the premium. But it sounds like a lot of it is also a change in attitude. I wonder if you could, I don't know if you can quantify how important it is. It's not just money, there's a change in attitude. And how does that come about?
¿Cómo es que pasó eso?
Pasó que el cambio.
Como que el programa sí le da más dinero al rancho y algunos de los beneficios provienen de ese dinero, pero hay beneficios que no son del dinero, que son de un cambio de actitud por parte del patrón. ¿Por qué crees que se ha logrado ese cambio? ¿Cómo se logró?
No sé mucho, pero pues no sé la parte que ellos les dan el premio que le dan a las granjas es de cuando están los problemas. Entonces, siento que el patrón agarra como, si está en la actitud de tratar de que sus trabajadores estén mucho más tiempo en esa granja, realmente como iniciar donde está el problema mucho más grave. Y es donde se van haciendo los cambios. Este cambio no fue de la noche a la mañana, esto es un proceso. Pero en el momento que tú entras en el programa, vas a mejorar la vivienda, tal vez, mejoras el sueldo. Son cosas que poco a poco van pasando. Esto no es de que entras y todo va a cambiar, no, sino que es un proceso.
So I guess I don't know exactly how to respond, but what I would say in my experience is that the program creates a structure to effectuate a change. And we're conscious as workers that not everything is going to change overnight. And you don't change everything as soon as the farm enters. But workers and farmers are able to have a conversation about what are the priorities, whether it's starting with housing or starting with wages. You're going to start seeing improvements immediately, and then they roll out over time until you have the conditions that you want.
Any other questions? Senator Brock?
I'd like to try to understand the impact of Milton with Dignity on compensation. Do you get the federal minimum wage?
See this page, sueldo federal.
Sí,
Yeah.
Are you paid overtime?
Te pagan el tiempo extra cuando trabajas más allá de 40 horas la semana?
no,
No,
aún todavía no.
no, there's still not overtime.
How many days a week do you work typically?
¿Cuántos días la semana trabajas?
6.
6.
6 days a week. And the hours that you work on each of those days,
Cada día.
Trabajo de 4 a 10 y regreso de 1 a 5.
I work from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then I come back from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m.
for housing, do you have to pay anything for your housing, or is your housing included as part of your wage?
¿Tú tienes que pagar por la vivienda o está incluido dentro de eso?
Dentro del sueldo.
It's included within the wage.
I'm sorry?
It is included within the wage.
It is included within the wage. Okay. So you're paid a wage that is the federal minimum wage, and then your housing is provided at no additional cost?
Federal y luego te dan vivienda sin costo adicional.
Sí.
Yes.
And do you have to pay anything to maintain your housing? For example, do you have to pay for heating, do you have to pay for electricity, or is that all included in the housing that's provided?
¿Tienes que pagar algo adicional en la casa por la calefacción, la electricidad, alguna utilidad o está incluido?
Tenemos que pagar el internet. Y si se pasa la luz, también la tenemos que pagar.
We pay for the internet, and then with the electricity bill, if there's over a certain amount that's used, then we have an arrangement where we pay towards that as well.
For electricity. Okay. And for transportation, do you have your own transportation, or is any transportation provided as part of the job?
Y para transportación, ¿tú pagas por transportación o tienes tu propia?
Sí, tengo que moverme, pero no me paga nada sobre eso. Eso va bajo yo me hago cargo de eso.
I have my own transportation, but that's by my own accounts. I don't get paid for it or pay for it.
For other kinds of benefits that are sometimes included with a job, such as medical benefits, insurance, do you get anything like that?
Seguro médico, ¿el trabajo te da un seguro médico o algo así?
No.
No.
And how about time off or vacation or sick days? Do you get any of that?
De vacaciones, días de enfermedad, ¿recibes esto?
Sí, ahora nos dan, después de que el programa entró, nos dan después de los 2 años que está trabajando en el rancho. Tiene derecho a 2 semanas de vacaciones. Sí, son pagadas. El día de enfermedad también.
Yes, when our farm entered the program, there's a delay of 2 years, but then we have 2 weeks of paid vacation per year. and we have paid sick days as well.
Just wanted to follow up on the question about the wage and minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is something in the $7 range. You're paid more than that.
En federal, eso es $7.25 la hora. Tú recibes más de eso, ¿verdad? Yes. El federal es $7.25, luego el estatal es la 13.65. Si puedes aclarar
Sí,
esto.
sí, sí. Sí, estoy en el 1365.
Yes, so the 1367, that's the minimum wage that we get on the farm.
Thank you. Other questions? Our legislative council may have.
You just asked my clarifying question.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to clarify whether it's the federal or state.
Okay. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming in and testifying. Bill, thank you for providing the translation for all of the witnesses that we heard from this morning. Did you want to say anything to wrap up?
I would, yeah. I have probably about 15 minutes or so of prepared remarks. I'm seeing that we're at noon. I could say a couple closing words right now, or perhaps at the discretion of the chair, if we could start up after lunch just to close out this session, or perhaps.
Yeah, I think maybe if you could, ideally, if you could condense your closing statement into a shorter time, that would be probably the best, because we have a full afternoon as well. And we can, of course, take your written, if you have written testimony, we can post that and make sure that the committee sees it too.
Understood, yeah. Just some bullet points, unfortunately. But I'll be brief and perhaps hopefully at a future committee meeting as well. Could be afforded with some time. So you heard from a number of people providing testimony about the current state of the dairy industry and the changes that have been made possible through the Milk with Dignity program. And what we've seen, and there's a story in Vermont Public last week that referred to this as a tale of two dairy industries. And that is really what we're seeing right now. To provide a little bit more context on the survey that was referred to, this was a survey conducted in the spring and summer of this year with 212 dairy workers around the state. This was done under the guidance of the University of Massachusetts Amherst Labor Center. And if the committee is interested, we could provide contact information of the professor who provided the academic guidance on that survey, and perhaps she could come in as well. What's been shared with the committee is a two-page document with some preliminary results of that survey. There's a lot more information that we could speak about if given the time. And for example, I noted Senator Renner, you had some questions about plumbing and hygiene, and we could get much more into that. The committee's also been provided with a recently published report on the impact of the first 7 years of the Milk with Dignity program. This is a 30-something page report. The paper versions are still at the printer. So in the next committee meeting, we'll provide you with paper copies as well. But in the meantime, those are available and have a lot of the information that you were questioning. And I was struck in particular by your question, Representative Chestnut Tangeman, about both the sort of material and non-material benefits of Milk with Dignity. And it's such an important thing that you raise. And we always say, we don't call the program milk at $13.67 an hour, milk with 5 paid vacation days. We call it Milk with Dignity because it's really about changing the nature of what it means to be a farm worker in Vermont. And that's where it's had the most success in changing these really entrenched relationships of imbalance that have happened over the decades and charting a new course and a new future for the dairy industry. And so there's a lot of information in that report about the ways that the program is effectively addressing child labor. There was this New York Times expose about child labor in the Vermont dairy industry, among other places, which really caused quite a scandal. This is a really ugly part of the sector in Vermont, as it is around the country. Milk with Dignity is tackling that. Violence is another issue. There have been, including recently this summer, documented cases of employers physically abusing and assaulting dairy workers in this state. And we could share more about that in the future. This is another issue where having the Milk with Dignity in place both serves to prevent and mitigate violence and also create effective resolutions if violence does occur. Housing construction is another big piece. The housing conditions on farms in the program are so much better than housing conditions outside the program. And here's one area where the premium paid by the company has been a part of the solution, but farms' participation in the program has also provided them with additional resources for new housing construction. And the report has a lot of information about that. I believe it was Senator Brock or somebody had asked about, is there a list of farms? Migrant Justice doesn't make public that information at farms' request. Not every farm wants to be identified. But some farms on their own accord do talk about their participation in Milk with Dignity. The report has a wonderful piece written by a dairy farmer in Franklin County. And if you look at past program reports, you'll see other pieces written by participating farmers as well, talking about the benefits accrued to them, not only from the premium that they receive from Ben and Jerry's, but also in additional report in human resources. The program helps provide model policies against sexual harassment, for example, or against discrimination, and helps to resolve disputes before they could become violations of workers' rights. So to close it out and to move on to some of our recommendations, the first is regarding minimum wage. As this new survey shows, the median wage for immigrant farm workers in Vermont is $11.67 an hour. That is a full $2 an hour less than the state minimum wage. The question was asked about housing deductions. The first response to that is, as the first witness said very eloquently, you have to look at the conditions of the housing first before you think about how they can be taken into account as a non-wage benefit. What is the market rate of a shared room or sometimes a shared bed on the second floor of a dairy parlor? If that's not being occupied by a dairy worker, who's going to occupy that housing? Well, what's the market rate of a leaky trailer that doesn't have sufficient heat in the winter? Where workers have bed bugs and cockroaches. So first you have to take into account the quality of housing. But even if we were talking about quality housing, dignified housing conditions, we could compare this to H2A, where, as you heard from Allison Eastman in your last meeting, housing deductions there aren't housing deductions for the wages in the H2A program. Workers there are paid $70.80 an hour, more than $6 an hour more than the median dairy worker receives. And there aren't housing deductions from those wages. So closing the loophole in minimum wage to ensure that agricultural workers are paid at least the state minimum wage in Vermont is one recommendation that we have for community. The second recommendation is to think about how the state of Vermont can promote the Milk with Dignity program, which, as was noted, is not state regulation. These are private agreements between dairy workers, dairy farmers, and dairy companies that have been remarkably successful in promoting a culture of collaboration and continuous improvement that is creating an alternative pathway for farms and farm workers in the state. And by volume, about 20% of Vermont's dairy industry is enrolled in the Milk with Dignity program. And we see two ways in particular that the state of Vermont could support the expansion of the Milk with Dignity program. The first is by taking a close look at the various subsidies that are provided to agricultural operators in the state. The committee assistant has provided you with the 2021 report from State Auditor Doug Hoffer about Vermont state subsidies to the dairy industry. And in that, the auditor reports that between fiscal year 2010 and fiscal year 2019, more than $285 million was spent by the state of Vermont on programs and policies that support the dairy industry. And in the last year, calculated by the reports, fiscal year 2019, that spending totaled $35 million. The unfortunate reality is that the state is spending hundreds of millions of dollars, in part, propping up employment relations that, to put it very mildly, are less than optimal. It would behoove the state, it would behoove the dairy industry, and of course, dairy farm workers themselves, if the state were to look at how those state subsidies, how that funding can be used as a point of leverage towards incentivizing dignified conditions and quality housing on these farms. So looking at agricultural tax expenditures, farm and conservation incentives, grants and services offered for dairy farm businesses, discounted fees, et cetera. Looking at how the state could provide additional premiums or condition receipt of those subsidies on farms' participation in the Milk with Dignity program. The second part, the second recommendation that we would ask this committee to look into for how the state of Vermont could support the expansion of Milk with Dignity is procurement. The state of Vermont, the state government buys a lot of dairy products in a number of different ways. So having a purchase preference or conditioning state procurement of dairy products on a farm's participation in the Milk with Dignity program would be a great step forward in a concrete way that the state can support the dignified conditions you've been hearing about. And another part of that could be looking at incentives. And we have a great example of 2021's Act 67, the local food purchasing incentive, where the state of Vermont said, we are going to provide incentive grants to K through 12 dining services as a way of ramping up their local purchasing. That's been a quite successful program in helping K-12 schools to buy more local food. Unfortunately, and for a number of very good reasons, dairy products were actually excluded from that law. But we could envision a similar sort of incentive program for K through 12 schools to buy Milk with Dignity and receive a tiered incentive program for supporting not only local dairy farms, but local dairy farms that are providing dignified treatment. And now the final recommendation that we have is about unionization and the extension of collective bargaining rights. So you've heard most of our testimony today is talking about the Milk with Dignity program, which is an alternative that exists in fact in the state and that were collective bargaining rights to be extended to agricultural workers, Migrant Justice would continue to focus on the Milk with Dignity program. However, we think as a matter of principle, as a matter of basic equity, and understanding that Milk with Dignity does not currently cover all farm workers in the state and only exists in one sector of the state's agricultural industries, we think it is very important that farm workers be afforded collective bargaining rights in the state of Vermont. You all know the history of why agricultural workers were excluded from collective bargaining rights in the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's a matter of justice and equity that exclusion be closed. So as the committee considers this and considers recommendations, a couple of the things that we would like to see and would like the opportunity to speak more about are one is the right to strike. We think that were collective bargaining rights to be afforded to agricultural workers in the state, it's important that the right to strike not be denied. As you heard in the last committee meeting, 11 of the 14 states that currently extend collective bargaining rights to agricultural workers allow those workers to strike, albeit in some instances, limited circumstances. And we think that that would be an important part of Vermont's approach as well. The second piece is about the size of the bargaining unit. The Vermont Labor Standards Act currently has a bargaining unit minimum of 5 workers. And we think that given the nature of agriculture in the state, and given the fact that most farm workers are working on farms with fewer than 5 workers, it would be very important to not exclude the majority of farm workers. And so the committee should take a good hard look at the size of the bargaining unit. Hawaii and Massachusetts are 2 state examples of states that have gone below 5 workers as the minimum size for the bargaining unit. And we think it would behoove Vermont to do so as well. And the piece of that we think deserves a really solid look. And I believe I heard you, Representative Chestnut Tangeman, talk about this in a previous meeting, is thinking about sectoral bargaining, thinking about what would it look like for there to be a master collective bargaining agreement within the dairy industry, that there wouldn't have to be farm by farm, operation by operation, but a more efficient, a more effective, and a more logical approach could be thinking about a recommendation that would allow for sectoral bargaining for workers on multiple farms to negotiate with employers on multiple farms in order to create a standard for the dairy industry in the state of Vermont. So when looking at collective bargaining rights, again, right to strike, bargaining unit size that would include more farm workers, and an arrangement that would allow for sectoral bargaining are 3 things that we would like the committee to study more, and that we'd be happy to talk more about in future meetings. And with that, I'll wrap it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone with a hand up, so I'm going to suggest that we stop here then, since we are running a little bit late. And I'm sure that there are questions we might not have even thought of yet. So we'll have an opportunity at some point to have that conversation again. Thank you very much, Will.
So, quick, will there be a summary of your remarks in writing? We
We could certainly provide one.
That would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, particularly the recommendations.
In about the next 3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know what that one for lunch.
All right, let's be back at, I'm going to say, let's be back